promised it was the last time with him, but emotions took over and now he's canceling our wedding. Every time, I kept thinking about how things would have been different if I had walked away that day like I had planned to. Maybe I would still be preparing for my wedding or got married by now. But I didn't. I turned back and everything else turned with me. Hi Reddit, my name is Anna. I'm here to share with you all how I ruined my relationship with my fiancé, Jay. Before I met Jay, there was Ethan. He wasn't just an ex, he was my first serious love. We met in university, and it wasn't one of those slow burns. It was intense from the beginning, like the kind of connection you don't prepare for but can't ignore. He was passionate, emotional, and so present that it was almost overwhelming. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. For a while, I thought he was the one I would end up with. But life wasn't that simple. We had different ideas about the future. He wanted to travel and move around, chasing contracts and dreams. I wanted something stable, something I could build. We argued a lot about timelines, about priorities, about settling down. His restlessness started to feel like rejection. I started feeling like I was just an option in a life full of moving parts. After 2 years of the back and forth, I ended it. It broke me to walk away, but I convinced myself it was the right thing. I cried for weeks. I blocked him everywhere. I didn't want to see anything that would make me second-guess my decision. Slowly, the pain softened into memory, and I tried to rebuild. Then I met Jay. Jay was calm where Ethan had been fired. He was thoughtful, measured, and dependable. Everything he said, he meant. He didn't promise wildly, but what he gave fully. At first, I wasn't even sure I liked him enough. He didn't give me the butterflies. But over time, I found something more lasting. Peace. Jay gave me peace. No highs and lows, just steady ground. And for someone who had lived in the chaos of Ethan's love, that felt like safety. We started dating seriously about a year after Ethan and I ended. Jay didn't rush me. He listened when I was afraid to commit. He never pried too much into my past, and when I finally told him about Ethan, he just nodded and said he hoped I'd healed. I thought I had. Maybe I told myself I had because it was what I wanted to believe. We spent 3 good years together. There were small bumps, as all relationships have, but never anything big enough to make me doubt him. When he proposed, it felt right. There was no drama, just him kneeling in the middle of a dinner I had planned for his birthday, asking if I was ready to make a home with him. And I was, or I thought I was. I said yes. My parents were thrilled. His family welcomed me like I was already one of them. We picked a date. We booked the venue. Dresses were tried. Colors were chosen. Vendors were paid. I was preparing to be someone's wife, and in many ways, I was excited. The wedding planning brought us closer and somehow also made me more aware of everything. I started thinking more about my future, what kind of wife I wanted to be, what kind of home we'd have, whether I'd be a good mother someday. These were thoughts I never had with Ethan. We had lived in the moment. With Jay, everything was future-focused, safe, predictable, settled. And then on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, I saw Ethan again. I had gone to a boutique to pick up fabric for my engagement wedding attire. It was in a part of town I didn't visit often, but my friend had insisted the place had the best quality fabrics. I was walking back to my car when someone called my name. I turned and saw him, Ethan leaning against a silver SUV, looking almost exactly like I remembered, but a little more refined. The hair was shorter. He looked like he had been doing well. For a second I froze. There was a kind of dull ache in my chest that surprised me. It had been 4 years. I hadn't seen him, hadn't heard his voice. He smiled, not like a stranger, but like someone who remembered everything. I forced a small smile and gave a polite wave, already turning away. But he called my name again, and this time I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the person who had once made my world spin. He asked if we could talk for a minute. Just catch up. I wanted to say no. I really did. But I was curious, maybe too curious. We sat at a cafe 2 shops down. It was supposed to be quick, a few minutes, but we ended up talking for more than an hour. He told me about his work, how he finally found stability, how he'd stayed single mostly, never really found anyone that fit. Then he said he always wondered if I was the one who got away. I should have ended it there, thanked him for the conversation, and walked away. But I didn't. I nodded and smiled and said I was engaged now. He congratulated me. There was a quiet pause between us. I didn't fill it with words, but I also didn't leave. That silence did something. It shook something loose in me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering the way he looked at me, the way he still knew exactly how to pull me into that emotional space. I kept thinking about the way he said he never found anyone else. It should have meant nothing, but it didn't. I told myself it was just nostalgia, that I was romanticizing the past, that Jay was my present and future. But still, when I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan. And that was where the trouble began. I tried to push the meeting with Ethan out of my mind. I even told myself I wouldn't mention it to Jay. Not because I wanted to hide something, but because I convinced myself it wasn't important. It was just an unexpected coincidence. A blip in the middle of a busy week. But it stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. In the days that followed, I found myself reaching for old memories without realizing it. Songs I hadn't played in years, a restaurant we once went to. Even the way I looked at my old photos changed. I had kept one or two from university, deep in a folder I never opened. Then I opened them. I looked at his face, and something stirred again. Meanwhile, everything around me kept moving forward. Jay and I were knee-deep in wedding plans, venue booked, invitations sent. My parents were constantly calling to ask about the color codes. His sisters created a group chat for bridal shower ideas. The countdown had already begun. Everyone else was excited. I was too, or at least I tried to be. But that excitement started feeling like a costume I wore. It didn't sit right on my skin. One evening, Jay came over to my place with a new set of invitation cards. They were beautiful, cream and gold. Our names were beautifully printed on it with the date that we had picked. A date that stared at me like a deadline. I was under a whole lot of pressure. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror, wondering what exactly I was doing. I didn't tell anyone about seeing Ethan. I knew what they'd say, that I was just being silly, that I had a good man and a beautiful future waiting, that love from the past is supposed to stay in the past, and maybe they were right. But the more I tried to bury it, the more it bubbled to the surface. It didn't help that Ethan reached out again. He found me on Instagram. I had unblocked him years ago, but never thought he'd look. He sent a short message saying that it was really nice seeing me and hoped I was happy seeing him. I stared at it for minutes and then ignored the message for hours before replying. I typed, deleted, retyped, then finally settled on, yes, I was. It should have ended there. It didn't. He replied the next day, something casual, harmless, and just like that, the messages started. Once a day, then twice. Then we were talking like old friends again, laughing about random things, sharing music like we used to. I didn't tell Jay. Again, I told myself it was innocent. Except it wasn't. Because my heart started shifting. I began comparing. Ethan made me laugh in ways Jay never did. He was spontaneous, deep. He still had that intensity. And I remembered how much that intensity once mattered to me. I started looking at Jay differently. His calmness, which I used to love, began to feel like distance. His silence started to feel like absence. I knew it wasn't fair. He hadn't changed. I had. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through Ethan's Instagram, looking at pictures of his life, his travels, how he smiled, who he followed. Then I saw a picture of him with someone, a woman. It wasn't romantic, but it still made me pause. I zoomed in without thinking. I felt a sting of something I didn't expect. Jealousy. That was when I knew I was slipping. I started making excuses to avoid wedding meetings. I told Jay I was tired, that work was overwhelming. He didn't argue, he just nodded and held my hand. That made it worse, because I could feel his goodness, and I was slowly betraying it. Then Ethan suggested we meet again. Just coffee, he said. I should have said no. I should have remembered the promise I made to myself, to Jay, to the life I was building. But the truth was, I wanted to see him, not for closure, but because I missed him. Because I wanted to know if the connection I felt that day was real, or just my mind playing tricks on me. I agreed to meet him the next Saturday of that week. When the day came, I didn't tell anyone. I lied to Jay and said I had an appointment with my stylist. That morning, I felt really anxious and nervous. My conscience, on the other hand, took a toll on me the entire drive. But when I saw Ethan waiting, leaning against the railing outside the cafe. That internal noise quieted. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He asked me if I was happy. I said I was. He looked at me and said I didn't seem sure. I laughed it off, but he didn't. He told me he missed me, that seeing me brought everything back, that he never stopped wondering what would have happened if I stayed. And I said nothing. I just looked at him and let those words settle in places I thought I had closed off. When I got home that night, Jay was there. He had brought dinner. He kissed my forehead and asked how the appointment went. I smiled and said it was fine. Then I sat on the bed and stared at the food while he washed his hands in the bathroom. My appetite was gone. I didn't cheat that day. But I had already started the slow drift, and in my heart, I knew something had already broken. I told myself it was just closure. Maybe if I saw him one last time, all the lingering questions would fade, that if I faced it fully, the curiosity would die and I could finally move on, completely. That was the lie I told myself as I typed another message to Ethan. It didn't feel wrong at the moment. It felt familiar, easy, like falling into a rhythm I had memorized long ago. Jay was still present, still good to me, but I had grown quieter around him. Our conversations became shorter, filled with silence that neither of us addressed. He noticed. I could tell from the way he lingered after saying goodbye, or how he asked if I was okay a little too often. I always said I was fine. Smiled, kissed him, lied. I hated how effortless it became. Ethan and I met again. This time it wasn't a coincidence or a casual meetup. It was intentional. We had dinner, real dinner, a table for two, soft music in the background, low lights, a bottle of wine. He wore that cologne I remembered, the one I once stole from his shelf just to keep close. I wore a dress I knew he'd like. It was never just about catching up, and we both knew it. It was more like a romantic date. We talked like we had never stopped. He still remembered all the things I loved, the way I dipped my fries in ice cream, how I hated loud chewing. He laughed when I brought up how we once got lost on our first road trip, and somewhere between dessert and goodbye, he touched my hand. I didn't pull away. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in Jay's apartment. He was asleep beside me, peaceful. I turned to look at him and felt a strange mixture of affection and grief. I still loved him, but not the way I was supposed to, and I was beginning to realize that maybe I never had, not like I loved Ethan. The line blurred quickly after that. More meetings, more lies. I told myself it was just emotional, that I hadn't crossed the ultimate line. But emotional cheating is still betrayal, and I knew it. Still, I let it happen. I chose it day after day. I stopped answering Jay's calls sometimes, said I was busy, that work was taking over. I became unreliable with wedding decisions, missed appointments, snapped when he asked too many questions, and he, trying to be supportive, gave me space. That hurt the most. His trust, his softness, his belief that I would come around. He had no idea I was slipping further away with every moment. Ethan began asking bigger questions. What if we tried again? What if I wasn't really over him? What if the universe had given us a second chance and I was about to throw it away? I told him I didn't know, that I was scared, that I hated myself for what I was doing. He said he understood, said he could wait, but not forever. The breaking point came on one Friday night. Jay had planned a surprise dinner with both our families to finalize wedding arrangements. He was excited. I was numb. On the way to the restaurant, I got a message from Ethan. He said he missed me, that he was nearby, that he just wanted to see me, even for 5 minutes. I told the driver to take a different turn. I never made it to dinner. Jay called me 8 times that evening. I ignored every call. My phone buzzed on Ethan's coffee table while we sat on his couch. I cried. Not because I regretted being there, but because I knew what I was breaking in the process. Ethan held me, told me it was okay, that sometimes love looks messy before it makes sense, that I had to choose what felt real. I got so emotional and Ethan tried calming me down. Whilst in that process, things got heated between us and we started kissing. That was all I could remember. The next morning, I found myself naked on Ethan's bed. I stood up and got dressed without waking him up. I went back to my apartment and found Jay waiting outside. He didn't look angry, just tired, disappointed. He asked where I was coming from that morning. I didn't say anything. He also said that we needed to talk. I said I couldn't at that moment. That was when he knew. He didn't push. He just handed me an envelope. It had photos of me and Ethan at the cafe, at dinner. Even at night, I didn't show up to dinner with our families. He had known. Maybe not all along, but long enough. I tried to speak. He held up his hand and said I didn't need to lie anymore. I apologized and explained that I was just catching up with an old friend. Jay believed me. He was not angry. He only said I should let know my whereabouts. I was happy he believed me, but I was not aware that Jay would pay more attention to movements. I didn't know Jay had started to look at me differently. Maybe I was too consumed with guilt to notice the subtle changes. His calmness became quieter, like the air just before a thunderstorm. He was still attentive, still thoughtful, but there was a heaviness behind his eyes that I kept brushing off. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was still in control, but I wasn't. The last time I saw Ethan, I told myself it would be the last. Again. I didn't even know what I was trying to hold on to anymore, closure or chaos. He had this way of pulling up memories from years ago, of saying things only someone who knew my past could say, and it always hit too deep. We continued meeting in public places, cafes tucked into corners of the city where I felt anonymous. The guilt ate me in the evenings, but during the moments with him, my emotions got louder than reason. One Thursday, I told Jay I needed space to work on wedding errands by myself. I carried my tote bag, dressed down, and left the house without a second glance. Ethan had suggested a small gallery opening. I told myself we were just going to look at art. We would talk a little. We would leave separately. And then I would go home. But nothing ever stayed within the lines with him. What I didn't know was that Jay had followed me. He didn't make a scene. He didn't call my name. He just watched from a distance. He saw Ethan pull me close when I was talking. He saw the way I smiled and tilted my head the way I only ever did when I felt truly comfortable. He saw me let Ethan kiss me just outside the gallery doors, and I didn't pull away fast enough. He didn't need more than that. He went home before I did. When I got back later that night, Jay was in the kitchen drinking tea like nothing happened. He asked me about my day. I lied, said I had run errands, and told him I was tired. He looked at me and nodded, that was all. But his eyes didn't meet mine. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. He wasn't angry, not openly. He didn't confront me with rage or accusations. He just stopped making future plans. One day I asked if he had confirmed the honeymoon resort, and he told me to hold off on finalizing the payment. I laughed nervously, unsure of what he meant, but he didn't explain. A week later, the wedding planner called and told me she received an email from Jay requesting that all further arrangements be paused. I thought it was a mistake. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. When he came home that night, I waited at the dining table. He sat across from me and finally looked me in the eye. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and placed it on the table. I knew what was coming even before he unlocked it. He showed me a photo, me and Ethan, the gallery steps, the kiss. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. My heart dropped so fast it felt like gravity betrayed me. He said nothing for a few seconds, then slid a small envelope across the table. I opened it. It was a printed copy of the receipt for the wedding venue deposit. Beside it, another letter, his formal request to withdraw his part of the payment. He had done everything silently. He said he had suspected something for weeks. He also told me that he knew my meeting with Ethan on the day of the engagement dinner was not just an ordinary meeting. But he chose not to say anything. Also, he told me that he had seen how distant I became, how often I looked away when we talked about the wedding. He said he needed to see for himself because he didn't want to accuse me without proof. That hurt more than any shouting would have. I tried to explain. I told him I didn't know what came over me. I told him I didn't want Ethan. I just got confused. But he didn't react. He just looked tired. He asked me one question. Why did you say it was over with him when we started dating if it wasn't? I had no answer. He stood up quietly, walked to our shared room, and returned with a small travel bag, and then walked out the door. That night, I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The house felt colder. The silence had weight. I texted him the next day, but the message never got a reply. I called, no answer. I didn't know where he went. He hadn't gone to his mother's place, at least not that I knew of. His best friend wouldn't tell me anything. His sister stopped replying to my messages too. A few days later, I went to Ethan's apartment, confused and emotional. I cried in his arms. I told him the wedding was called off. He held me, and for a moment I felt comfort, but then he said something that I wasn't ready for. He told me that we can't really be together. I pulled away from him and stared at his face. That wasn't what I wanted. I hadn't made this mess not to replace Jay with Ethan. I didn't even know what I wanted. I just wanted to stop feeling torn. I wanted to go back in time and not return Ethan's message that day he found me again. I didn't respond to Ethan. I left his apartment and walked for hours. The streets felt blurry. Everything felt unreal. I thought about calling Jay again, but what would I say? That I still wanted to marry him? That I was sorry for letting emotions lead me into a decision that cost us everything? I had betrayed the person who gave me peace. And now, the silence left behind felt louder than anything Ethan had ever said. By the weekend, the wedding was officially canceled. The venue manager called me directly. So did the decorator. I had to explain to my parents that things had fallen apart. I didn't tell them why at first because I couldn't bear to, but I later did. The pressure to know what happened, and I just couldn't withhold that information from them for that long. No one reached out from Jay's side. He had vanished completely, taking with him every version of our future that I once believed was certain. And Ethan? He stopped answering my calls too. The moment the wedding was canceled, he began acting like we were strangers. But my heart was broken. All I could feel was regret. I didn't want what I lost to be replaced by something familiar, but broken. I just wanted the silence to stop. The days after the cancellation moved slowly, as if time was deliberately making me sit with every emotion I had tried to suppress. There were no loud breakdowns, no dramatic calls, just the weight of an ending I knew I had caused. I didn't hear from Jay again, not even once. His absence wasn't loud, but it lingered in everything, my mornings, my meals, the wedding emails that I had to unsubscribe from. My phone felt heavier in my hands. I scrolled past messages from friends asking questions about why the wedding was suddenly off. I left most of them unanswered. Some of them knew about what happened, but they chose to rub it on my face. I didn't reply to any of their messages so it wouldn't trigger my emotions. I had cried enough at that period. Ethan never reached out or cared to ask if I needed anything. At that time, I tried to remind myself of how we started, of how easy things were when it was just us. But he wasn't interested in easy anymore. What I had done wasn't about choosing someone over another. It was about not knowing who I was or what I wanted. He bluntly told me the last time we met that we couldn't talk anymore, not as friends or anything else. I didn't argue. I just said I understood, and that was the last time I heard from him. It was not worth begging. I had lost a treasure compared to whatever it was with him. Some nights I stared at the ceiling and replayed how things had spiraled. I kept thinking of that day at the gallery, how I had smiled at Ethan without thinking, how my body leaned into a space it had no business returning to. I tried to imagine how Jay must have felt watching it, the quiet heartbreak of seeing the person you love give a piece of themselves to someone else. I kept wondering if I had stayed away, if I had drawn the line clearly the first time Ethan reached out, would things have been different? But those thoughts didn't change what had already happened. I started therapy a few weeks later. I didn't tell my friends at first. I just knew I couldn't go on pretending I had control over everything when I clearly didn't. The first few sessions were hard. I struggled to explain what I felt because even I didn't fully understand it. I wasn't trying to destroy my life. I had just underestimated how unresolved emotions could creep in and take hold. The therapist asked questions that no one had asked before. Why did I feel responsible for everyone's happiness but mine? Why did I entertain something that made me feel alive in the short term, even though I knew it would destroy the long term? I didn't have all the answers, but the process gave me space to unpack what I had buried. I learned that guilt isn't always about the act itself, it's about what it reveals. My relationship with Jay had been strong, grounded, and thoughtful, but somewhere along the way, I stopped voicing my own fears. I had begun shaping myself into the person I thought I was supposed to be, saying yes to the wedding, yes to the life we were building, without ever asking myself if I was really ready. Ethan represented something unfinished, not just a love that had faded, but a version of myself I hadn't properly let go of. That part of me, reckless, emotional, untethered, still lived beneath the surface. When I saw him again, it wasn't just about him. It was about facing the version of me that never healed. Some people thought Jay might eventually forgive me, that he would return once the pain settled. But I didn't cling to that hope. I respected his silence. I knew that rebuilding trust after what I did wasn't just about apologies. It was about whether he could look at me again without seeing that betrayal, and I wasn't sure he ever could. I saw a photo of Jay once on social media posted by a mutual friend. He was smiling, surrounded by people I didn't know. It looked like he had traveled, maybe somewhere coastal. He looked healthy, peaceful. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering if he thought about me at all, wondering if he had started over. I didn't feel jealous, just a quiet ache of knowing I was no longer part of the life I had once planned with him. I didn't try to reach out. I had said all I could. Some endings don't come with closure. Some are just the result of mistakes you can't take back. The hardest part wasn't losing Jay. It was realizing how easily I had thrown away something good because I hadn't fully healed. I had told myself I was ready. I had walked into a commitment thinking love was enough. But love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, over and over again. And when I chose to meet Ethan that day, I made a different choice. Now, months later, I don't cry about it every day, but the lesson remains. Some mistakes change your life not because they break you, but because they reveal what was broken in you all along. And maybe that's the start of something better, not a second chance with Jay, or a rekindled flame with Ethan, but a chance to finally understand myself. Update. Hello, Redditors. It has been a full year since the day I was supposed to get married. I remember waking up that morning with the date heavy in my chest. The apartment was quiet, just like most days now, and the silence reminded me of everything that had changed. There was no wedding dress hanging by the door, no guests flying in, no last-minute checks on vendors or table arrangements. It was just me, in my home, trying not to think about what that day used to mean. I didn't tell anyone it was the anniversary of the canceled wedding. I didn't want sympathy or advice. I didn't want people checking in and reminding me that it was okay. I just wanted the day to pass like any other day, without a fuss. I spent the morning cleaning, then I took a long walk, not because I had somewhere to go, but because moving helped me feel grounded. I walked past parks, shops, cafes, all filled with strangers living out normal days. That helped somehow. After Jay, everything moved fast. Within a few days, his things were gone. I came home from work and found the keys on the kitchen counter, along with a few receipts and a note with bank details. He handled everything quietly. No drama, no big confrontation, just a clean break. It hurt more because of that. There was no scene, no moment of closure, just the absence of someone I was planning to spend forever with. Some days I still wonder if he had been planning to leave long before he found out. Maybe he had seen something in me shift. Maybe he just waited for the moment when it made sense to walk away. I'll never know. But after he left, I had to adjust quickly. I moved out of the apartment we picked together. I didn't want to stay somewhere that felt like his shadow still lingered. I found a smaller place not far from work. It's simple, a bit quieter, and mine. I barely spoke to anyone. I went to work, did what I needed to do, and came home. I didn't explain anything to my colleagues. I didn't share details with distant friends. The people closest to me knew the basics, but even then, I avoided long conversations. I didn't know how to explain what happened without sounding like I was making excuses or searching for pity. Some friends stayed close. They checked in without being pushy. They sent me food or invited me over even when I said no. Others faded out. I noticed the shift, but I didn't chase after them. I think sometimes people don't know what to say when something like this happens, especially when they don't fully understand it. I didn't blame them. I just kept my world small. The therapy I started months after the wedding was called off was a little bit helpful. At first, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I was tired of talking, tired of thinking. But those sessions gave me a space to speak without being judged or interrupted. Slowly, I unpacked everything, not just the failed engagement or the situation with Ethan, but also things I hadn't realized were buried deeper. I learned to take responsibility without losing myself in guilt. I never reached out to Jay again, and he never tried to contact me either. There were moments when I hovered over my phone, thinking maybe I should say something, apologize again, explain myself better. But I always stopped. I knew he had made his choice, and as painful as it was, I had to respect it. Trying to fix what was broken would only pull both of us back into something that had already ended. Ethan disappeared too. After that last conversation where he told him it was over, he didn't message again. I didn't block him. I just left things as they were. Sometimes I felt used and wondered if we would have eventually found a way to make it work. But I couldn't keep building bridges between who I was and who I used to be. I had to let go and didn't push further. I didn't date anyone for a long time. I wasn't scared of love, but I didn't trust myself. I didn't want to carry the weight of unresolved feelings into something new. I needed time to understand why I had made the choices I made, why I had jeopardized a future that was supposed to be secure. It wasn't just about missing Ethan. It was about confusion, fear, and a part of me that didn't fully believe I deserved the happiness Jay had offered. I've learned that love isn't always enough. It has to come with clarity, with timing, with a sense of direction. I had love, but I didn't have the honesty or the strength to face what I was really feeling. I kept pushing things under the surface, hoping they would disappear. But they didn't. They found their way out, and when they did, it was too late to control the damage. These days, I focus on things that make me feel steady. I started volunteering at a local youth center. I picked up reading again. I take long walks in the evenings and spend more time alone without feeling lonely. I'm not trying to erase the past. I'm just trying to build a future that feels intentional. I still think about Jay sometimes, not in a longing way, but in a reflective one. He was good to me. He showed up, he made plans, and I let him down. That fact sits quietly with me. I carry it, but it doesn't crush me. It just reminds me to be better next time, if there ever is a next time. I think I've forgiven myself, at least mostly. There are still moments when I question everything, but they don't last as long anymore. Healing isn't a straight line, and I've stopped expecting it to be easy. So no, there was no big reconciliation, no surprise twist where we got back together, just real life, unfolding the way it often does, messy, quiet, and unpredictable, and I'm still here, learning how to live with it all,